My name is Norm Bolsky, your host, and this is the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast.
Thanks, Norm. It's an honor to be here, and it's been fun to work with you over the years.
Hello, and welcome to the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast with your host, Norm Bolsky. And today we are thrilled to welcome Russell Glass. And Russ is the CEO over at Headspace, leading the company's mission to transform mental health care to improve the health and happiness of patients all over the world. Russell, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, Norm, thanks for having me. I didn't wear any gloves. I didn't
That's
realize
okay.
that was part of the deal. I have a cowbell, though.
All right, we might bring that out later in the
That's
episode.
in the heavyweight category.
Are you a Sacramento Kings fan, and that's why you got the cowbell, or is it something else?
I'm a Saturday Night Live fan.
Yeah, love that Will Ferrell sketch. Him
Exactly.
and Christopher Walken were hilarious. So thank you for joining us. You're the second person in your household to be interviewed on this podcast. Your wife, Robin, has joined us earlier in a previous episode. So glad that we got both members of the household interviewed on this. And then for all of our listeners and viewers that don't know Russell's full background, so in addition to being currently CEO over at Headspace, he's a serial entrepreneur, held multiple CEO roles, most recently at Ginger before the merging of Ginger and Headspace. Helped Ginger increase sales from 2 million when he joined to over 50 million in revenue in just about 3 years. And then also prior to his Ginger days, was formerly leading products and marketing solutions at LinkedIn. And he sold his company Bezo to LinkedIn in 2014, excuse me. So would love to be able to dive in and hear about all of your experience, not only in healthcare, but also prior to joining healthcare. So I guess we'll start with, what was it like founding and leading Bezo?
Yeah, it was a pretty great experience. I think as an entrepreneur, you go through good ones and bad ones, right? I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and I had a pretty significant failure prior to Bizzo, and through that failure, I learned a lot about how do you grow great companies and how do you build great cultures and whatnot, and was able to apply a lot of those concepts to Bizzo. And we just founded it in 2008 and had some early ups and downs, but for the most part, that company was up and to the right. And
Love that.
We grew this incredible team and built really a market-changing business in the space we were in. And then to end up at LinkedIn, which was a great culture fit and a wonderful company, it was kind of a dream come true as an entrepreneur.
I love that. So actually, let's talk about the previous job to Bizzo. You mentioned you started a company before. It didn't necessarily go as planned. Like, what lessons did you learn in that first business that set you up to really succeed at Bizzo and obviously everything since?
There were a couple of startups before Bizzo, one that I founded and one that I joined. So the one that I founded was a company called Aegea. I was 23 years old. I was really early in my career, raised money from Sun Microsystems, which was the first real venture-backed company that I had built. And it was pretty much a disaster. I mean, pretty much everything that could go wrong in a company went wrong. We had an interesting idea to put apps on mobile devices before the iPhone. So the idea was
a good idea. Someone else just beat you to it, I guess.
Well, it's interesting. It was a really good idea, but great ideas that are too early are worse than great ideas that are too late, because there's just no market for them, right? It is really hard to pull off. And I think we learned a lot about chasing a market. We learned a lot about just hiring the wrong people and not focusing on culture. When that one failed, I was very introspective. I think you learn a lot more when you fail than when you succeed. I think you get, or at least you can if you get introspective about it. And I spent about a year really thinking about what went wrong. And I could narrow it down to three things: people, culture, focus.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the first product leader at a company called ZoomInfo. Mm-hmm. Great experience. That ended up being a very successful company. Between the learnings from the first one and then the learnings from that one, I applied those to Bizzo and really thought hard about the culture we wanted to build, our values, the kinds of people we wanted to hire. And it was just a completely different feel of an organization because we had so much, forethought going into how we were going to build that.
Yeah. Makes a ton of sense. Walk us through after that experience, like what culture you did try to build and did build at Bizzo, what cultures you try and have tried to build since, and then, what type of people do you typically look for in an early stage company at like the pre-seed or seed level?
The first thing that I think is more important than anything else is that you're intentional about it, right?
Mhm.
Different types of people, different types of businesses, different types of leaders are going to do well with different kinds of cultures.
Mhm.
And so I don't think there's any like one right culture or
Mhm.
one right type of people. The intentionality of thinking through, okay, we're going to be playing in this case, we were playing in the data space. So
Yeah.
we were aggregating business to business data. So trustworthiness is going to be really important. A focus on being transparent is going to be really important, right?
Mhm.
Certain things that, because the business that we're in requires trust because we're handling people's data. Healthcare is the same way, by the way.
Yeah.
It lends itself towards certain type of values. And so as you build that list of values and you build that list of things you care about, then, as an entrepreneur, you have to, I believe, look at like where are your strengths and where are your gaps or areas that you don't get as excited about and don't energize you as much. And ideally, you want to surround yourself with
Mhm.
people that fill those gaps, fill those blind spots. And so for me, I am highly creative. I like thinking big. I tend to be wildly optimistic about the world. I need to like surround myself with people that maybe are a little more narrow in focus, a
Mhm.
little more like operational in nature, that they really want to dig into the guts
Yeah.
of operations and create efficiency, that are not quite as optimistic, right?
Yeah.
That can temper the fact that I'm very optimistic. So if I'm advising an entrepreneur, I'm saying, okay, let's be intentional about what the kind of culture you're trying to
Mhm.
create, and let's surround yourself with people that are going to balance your natural tendencies, right?
Yeah.
To create the most effective team. I guess the final thing I'd say is there is a universality on early stage companies that I like curious people. We call it bright-eyed people
Mhm.
that believe that tomorrow will be better than today, because you're going to have ups and downs in these fast growth organizations, in these innovative organizations. And so people that get either frustrated by or struggle with change
Mhm.
and have trouble like seeing how things can get better, they can struggle in companies like startups and in companies
Yeah.
that change a lot and move fast. That often they might be better in a place that's a little more established, slower, changing. Tomorrow feels the same as today kind of organizations.
Yeah, we've had over 35 episodes up until this point on the pod, and I've mentioned a handful of times on this, depending on who I've talked to. I think as an entrepreneur and as someone who's, a founder of a business, you have to be an optimist. Like by nature, you have to be because the statistics show you're probably not going to be successful. So like you have to be an optimist to be like, "Hey, I'm going to be the exception, I'm not the rule. Here's why. It's not just me and my idea, but it's the team I build, it's the culture I build, it's a lot of the strategic planning to make sure you're improving your odds as you go. So I'm a big believer in that. I think it's really difficult to be a founder and be a pessimist. Very common that people that succeed, tend to be optimists by background. So, what were your greatest learnings and successes from Bizzo?
Well, like I mentioned, I think first the importance of culture, the importance of clearly articulated values, the importance of focus. We had a very specific thing we went out to do.
Hmm.
We built a very specific culture around it. We hired world class people, and that was a 6-year run that again, actually not too dissimilar from Ginger, although we started with zero at Bizzo. When we left Bizzo in 6 years, it was about a $60 million company.
Mhm.
We were about 160 people, and we transformed an industry. We invented a new way of doing things in the business advertising space, in the business data space. We were very focused on the kinds of companies that we thought we would be a fit with when it came to acquisition, and LinkedIn rose to the top of that list. So I think the lessons to me were mostly positive in that one, and the importance of culture and focus and your ability to drive success.
Excellent. I do think it's funny because in 2014, you guys got acquired by LinkedIn. Obviously, LinkedIn has exploded over the last 10 years. I was like an early user. I remember using it in 2011 as an intern at my current firm. And I've just seen the functionality blossom over the years. So, walk us through getting acquired by LinkedIn and leading product over there.
In 2014, we started to get a decent amount of inbound interest in our company, and a big software company that everybody's heard of, came to us and said, "Hey, we'd like to look at potentially acquiring you." And they put ultimately a big number in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to pay attention to it. We weren't currently looking at selling the company, but we had to pay attention to it. And I remember thinking to myself, we spent 6 years building this amazing culture. There's no way I want to sell that. I want to sell it to this company, because they were just not quite the opposite, but pretty close to the opposite in terms of, culture fit. And because of that, I knew up front that, okay, you might have a good exit, but you're not going to be successful, right? If the culture fit's not there, it's just going to be very difficult to make it work. Ultimately, I called LinkedIn up, with a partner of ours at the time, and said, "Hey, if there were ever any interest, there's some interesting strategic rationale for this. Now is the time." The CEO introduced me to their head of corp dev, and 6 months later, the acquisition was complete.
That's fantastic. So someone else's offer is what started that whole process.
That's right. That's right. It wasn't a formal process. It was a opportunistic, and really me and team not wanting to end up someplace that wasn't a good fit for our people. LinkedIn, in this almost, it felt like incredibly lucky way. Like if you looked at their values and you looked at our values, they were a complete overlap, right? It was just a company built in the same kind of mold as we built our company. And so despite the fact that we had integration challenges with LinkedIn and we had complexities we had to work through, the first year of that integration was hard because of the culture fit, because of the alignment and how we thought about the world. That ended up, being literally a transformative acquisition for LinkedIn, despite that difficult first year, to where that marketing solutions business is now the single largest business at LinkedIn. And at the time, it was a distant second, but it is grown to be multi-billions of dollars in revenue, all because of the transformation that acquisition really created back in 2014.
Yeah. And when people ask me, like, what makes great leaders and, like, why do great leaders make a huge impact on companies when they join them, a lot of times it's not only what they can accomplish, but it's what their network can accomplish. And by you doing the right thing by those employees, when you had a big number and you could have cashed out and, you'd have made a fine financial gain on that acquisition. The fact that you stuck to your guns and did what's right by your people and your product and just your company in general, taking your own self-interest out of it. I'd be surprised if there aren't some people from your, Bizzo days that worked with you again, later in your career. And I think that says a lot about why you do what you do, which is great. You've been a founder of a couple companies now. What traits do you think a founder needs to have to be successful?
Well, we talked about it. I think optimism is important. I think a view that tomorrow is better than today, a view that just because something is the way it is today doesn't mean it has to be that way, right? I think there's a natural tendency to think about solving problems and like, how could this be better, right? I also think entrepreneurs tend to be self-starters just in general. Maybe don't love working for bosses necessarily, right? Like I think there's a
Yeah.
natural tendency to want to work for yourself. One of the things I say to a lot of people who are thinking about it is, being an entrepreneur is the only job in the world where you get to decide exactly who you work with.
Yeah.
And that is a super powerful concept. Like surrounding yourself by only people that you are excited to surround yourself with
Yeah.
is pretty amazing. And if you can pull that off, I think, again, like I said, they tend to be curious. I think the entrepreneurs that I've seen, they tend to have a lot of interests, right?
Mhm.
There tends to be a diversity of thought and interest, different ways of looking at a problem, right?
Mhm.
Like you look at it from different angles because you might have different interests that give you ideas in that way. So creativity is probably something that I see a lot in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, that's all common themes I've seen with folks that have been successful. After being at LinkedIn and obviously having a great exit with Bizzo under your belt, you probably were very, very appealing to any tech company based in the Bay and all over the country. What inspired you to get into healthcare and kind of leave just like the tech world?
When I left LinkedIn, my whole goal was to be dad. I have
Mhm.
3 kids. As you know, a lot of people in healthcare know me as Robin Glass's husband. We have 3 kids at
That's
home.
no knock either, like she's
No,
got
no,
an
no,
incredible
no,
reputation
no,
herself.
no. I should be. I mean, that is one of my most important claims to fame. But at the time, we had an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old, and I had been running hard at this, both Bizzo and LinkedIn, for 9 years.
Mhm.
So really, since my first one was born, my third was born a week before we sold to LinkedIn.
Wow.
And so I had been going hard and wanted to spend time being dad,
Mhm.
and so I left LinkedIn to be dad, and I didn't have any plan. I just knew that I wanted to spend time with them and would figure it out from there. And incredibly lucky, privileged to be able to do that. It was an amazing experience. But after about a little over a year, I decided I have energy still. I still love entrepreneurship, but if I'm going to leave them every day, it needs to be for purpose.
Mhm.
And so I didn't want to just go back to tech entrepreneurship. I wanted to go to something that the world actually could benefit from and needed. And
Yeah.
that led me on a journey. Thought I would start another one. I've always started companies, and so I felt like that's likely the next
Mhm.
thing for me. But it led me on a journey that ultimately led me to Ginger
Mhm.
in mental health. And it just checked all the boxes from the standpoint of critical need in the world. I was shocked by how big the need was.
Yeah.
Had no idea. And this was back in 2018. And as I started to research it more deeply, I recognized that the world was not going to be able to ignore this much longer.
Yeah.
That it was kind of this latent need that people weren't talking about, right? Not nearly as much as they do today. But as I saw the cost of it to society, it was
Mhm.
obvious that this was poised to explode.
Yeah.
And
Let alone what was gonna happen another, 18 months later.
yeah, exactly. I did not predict the pandemic,
Yeah.
but I certainly saw that like it was only a matter of time before we had to spend way more money than we were spending on it today.
Mhm.
I was also raised by a child psychologist mom. So
Mhm.
I think I believed in this stuff. And then I was a Headspace meditation user myself. So I knew the power of taking care of your mental health.
Yep.
It all just sort of fit. The only thing that didn't fit really was it wasn't my company,
Yeah.
right? That it was someone else's company. And I'd never seen myself as like the kind of person that would come in and just take over someone else's, CEO. But I felt like as long as I could make it my culture, as long as it felt like I had the feel of my own company, that I could make it work.
How'd it
Uh,
come about?
it was a recruiter that I knew from a former life, Bizzo or otherwise,
Yeah.
who reached out and said, "Hey, I know you're thinking about impact. You should come talk to this company." And I remember saying to her, "Well, I'm not going to take over as someone else's CEO, but happy to take a look and maybe I can, connect them to some people that might have an interest in that." And of course. She's like, yeah, go talk to them, see what you think. And I fell in love with it was a diamond in the rough, truly. Like the product, they're still small. They had pivoted a few times. But when I looked at what they were trying to do and how they were trying to solve for it, and the size of the opportunity and the need, it was like, oh, I'm not going to come up with an idea as good as that. And so maybe I should think
I love
seriously.
that. Well, I love two things about that. Number one, I remember when it was like Ginger IO back in 2013. I remember the early iterations, and I was really, really happy to see them like really succeed at a very high level. And then two, I think it's a great lesson. Like when the recruiter calls, you got to answer, and you just got to keep an open mind. That's like a good life practice to have. So I heard it from Russell. Wasn't my plug. He said it himself.
That's right. That's right. And by the way, I'll add to that. I was ready to have those conversations because I had taken some time off. If you can, take some time off. If you can, get yourself some separation so that you're kind of expansive in your thinking, right? And then take opportunities.
That's great. So when you joined as CEO of Ginger IO at the time, you were rebranded maybe a little bit later. You led growth from about 2 million in recurring revenue to over 50 million in revenue in about a 3-year period. That's very explosive. That's tremendous growth. What are your go-to tips for CEOs in building digital health solution and building the commercial go-to-market strategy?
Well, first of all, I was new to healthcare. And so I think the first thing that was important for me is to have some modesty about what I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
and assume that I was going to be learning a whole bunch of new stuff before I could really be strategic
Mm-hmm.
in my thinking. But in the meantime, I could focus on some of the blocking and tackling that every company needs,
Yeah.
right? Product roadmaps, building an engineering team that can scale or a platform that can scale, building a go-to-market plan and
Mm-hmm.
supporting customers effectively and building a great team. So
Yeah.
all of that, the sort of blocking and tackling is the same in healthcare as it is anywhere. You have to build a great foundational culture, a great foundational team, values, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Make it something that can scale. But then the healthcare element to it, it's interesting. I found it to be an incredibly steep learning curve. There's so much to healthcare in terms of regulatory and the insurance landscape and the payer landscape and how you connect in with different parts of the healthcare ecosystem to make it work effectively. I mean,
Yeah.
you can kind of go as deep as you dare go, right?
Mm-hmm.
And still not find bottom. But to me, modesty allowed me to ask questions that were probably stupid questions that somebody who'd been in healthcare for a while might not be willing to ask.
Mm-hmm.
That was incredibly beneficial because sometimes just asking why and getting the answer, well, I don't really know why,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then it's like, well, let's figure that out. Like, let's understand why we're doing it this way. Because on the face of it, it seems like it doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
You see that in healthcare all the time. Things
Very
don't
little about our healthcare system makes sense. So there's a lot you can pick apart.
doesn't make sense at all. But I think what happens is if you're in it for if you've been in it your whole career, you don't ask why anymore.
Yeah.
You're
just like, that's the way it is.
That's the way it
you
is.
have to, work around.
But
these
that's
things.
right. But asking why allows you to kind of maybe look at it a little differently. And Ginger is a great example of a company that had been looking at it differently. And then I think I was able to come in and continue that, continue to, ask the whys. And if we didn't have a good answer on the why, we would change it. If we did, we might say, okay, we're not going to touch that because that seems important.
Yeah.
But again, being willing to ask those questions, I think, is one. Digital health entrepreneurs, be modest, bottom out on the whys, and don't assume that the whys are good reasons because they often aren't. They often are just because that's the way it started and it's just
Always
stayed
been
that
done
way.
that way, and we got to do it too.
The second thing, though, I think that's really important, and this was a learning for me, and it's interesting because it belies the explosive growth we had at Ginger. But I don't think that explosive growth is always the way to build a healthcare company. I think that, and we've seen this in a lot of companies out there that have grown explosively, but then they've run into real trouble, either from a regulatory standpoint or from a data standpoint and privacy standpoint. I think healthcare is one of those spaces where you want to get the core model right.
Yeah.
And make sure that you've figured out the unit economics and the right approach to how you're delivering care before you scale up. And I wouldn't say that about most industries. Most industries, you can be more aggressive. You know, I was fortunate when I joined Ginger that a lot of that core model was figured out, right? And when I say it was a diamond in the rough, it was like, wow, this thing is close to being ready to scale. But I think then you hear that, oh, $2 million to 50, we can do that too. But you may not want to. So you have to be ready for that in healthcare. You want to make sure that you're doing it the right way. It's going to take longer, but the TAM is so big that it's okay if it takes longer, right? Make sure your investors have that patience. But like what you're trying to do is one of these deals versus one of these deals, right?
Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. And I think what you said around being able to ask what you called stupid questions because you just didn't know healthcare coming in. I think it's really important that founders and CEOs and leaders in general show their own vulnerabilities because then it allows others in your organization to show vulnerabilities. If you come in and you're like, oh, I know everything and I've been successful before and you just got to follow my playbook, it creates a culture of deferring as opposed to like someone who has ownership and then will spend more time and effort coming up with strategies and solutions because they feel their voice is heard. So I think there's a lot to that around like being vulnerable and allowing others to try new things and try ideas and have ownership over things as opposed to just taking orders, so to speak. So I think that is a really important thing I've seen with successful leaders is being able to do that. What would you say the biggest difference is between building a tech data product and a digital health product?
I mean, look, there's a lot of similarities in terms of data being critical, in terms of an infrastructure for scaling being critical. I think culture and values being critical. I think the difference is then when you get into regulatory, you get into state to state variation, incredible complexity of managing what might be a specific state law that differs and might be completely the opposite of what another state wants you to do. And then the payer ecosystem. So, the levels of understanding, credentialing, NPIs, like everything that needs to be done to actually get reimbursement. Those two things, the regulatory and the payer space that you have to deal with to build these, they're like companies in and of themselves, right? In the tech space. So in the healthcare space, you're at least twice as complicated, if not 3 times as complicated as most tech businesses that I've seen.
Yep. I'm going to throw out a hot take.
Do we have a button for that? Is there like
sure. Well,
hot take?
We'll ring something. But I will make the bold claim that in tech, many times, more often than not, the best product wins. User experience kind of, eventually bubbles the cream to the top. In healthcare and specifically like health plan, employer sponsored healthcare, that isn't necessarily always the case. And I could say the most common answer I've been given to companies that are like maybe tier 2, tier 3 in their markets, but like some other company built a bigger valuation or is driving more revenue. Usually the answer is, well, we have a better product, but then comes the excuse of like why someone else won, but it wasn't a fair fight, or so to speak. You've come from both. You've been in pure tech, you've been in digital health, you've been successful in both. How true do you feel that is? That, in healthcare, the best product doesn't always win. And I want your opinion on if that's true, or you feel that's true, like why you think that is.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Well,
Or
first
just tell me I'm completely wrong and there's no.
Yeah, well, I was going to start with, I'm not going to say completely wrong.
I'll take it. I'm a big boy.
That would be unfair. I would say that you'd be surprised how often the best product doesn't win anywhere.
Okay.
And I think, in my experience, the best distribution wins. And that often isn't the best product,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's the best bundling strategy, or it's the best sales team, or it's the best marketing team, the best culture often win.
Mm-hmm.
And because, like, you can have the best product in the world, but if people don't get access to it, or they can't find it, or it doesn't come pre-built into Microsoft, Windows, you're not going to win, right? So I think there's a little bit of shift to your core point. And I would say that where I do think you're on target is that in healthcare, it's even less likely that the best product's going to win. And to me, it's like distribution
Mm-hmm.
from the standpoint of the payer relationships, from the standpoint of have you figured out how to make this something that people can easily, basically, if you remove the friction to people getting access to it, that is way more important in healthcare than even in the tech world.
Mm-hmm.
That, if you haven't removed all those frictions, you don't have a chance.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason why the best product doesn't win in healthcare is that if you spend too much time focused on building the best product and not enough time on distribution and getting it out there, someone's going to beat you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone's going to have enough distribution. And then the problem is,
How much better are you?
that's exactly right. The problem is, like, if you're only 2 times better, the switching cost is too high in healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the bar goes up. The 10x better is where the bar is. And that's a high bar to create that kind of switching cost, right? I mean, great example is primary care space. When you have a primary care provider and you move, let's say, you're in San Francisco, you have a primary care provider in SF, and you move an hour in traffic away. How often do you actually change that primary care provider to somebody who's a few doors down?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty rarely, right?
Yeah.
Because
You're like, oh, I'm only going once a year, and
I
you
don't
start
want to
justifying why
build a
you
new
shouldn't just
relationship.
pull the trigger.
I don't want to build a new relationship. I don't want to get to know someone new. I don't want to go through that. So it's friction filled to make that change. Healthcare's like that, right? There's all kinds of friction once you have it set up that makes it hard to switch.
So walk me through, you get to Ginger, you already have a company that's got a lot of potential. You're already driving a couple million in revenue. Like, you didn't have to invent the wheel. You just kind of picked up at an inflection point and really like helped them get in the right direction. What was the team like in the early years? Where was the product? Where was like the go-to-market strategy? And how much did you personally change? And how much did the team you built around you kind of change and move the company in the direction it went?
Yeah, I mean, some of those early days, it was there was a lot of change. I think there was about 50 people when I showed up. I think we probably kept half of them.
Yeah.
And just made some real changes to culture and skill sets. And like a company that's been around for as long as Ginger had been around, there's a lot of burnout
Yeah.
that's taken place. So even if some of those people might have been the right people, it was just time for them to go to do something else that they believed in, and for me to bring new people in that were excited to take this to the next level. So
Yeah.
there's some of that you want to happen regardless. So one of the first things I did, as you'd imagine, is I rebuilt the cultural tenets, the values, the vision and mission of the company. We dropped the IO, and we built the go-to-market from the ground up. We built the product roadmap from the ground up. The core product was quite good. What it was doing was really differentiated, but the company didn't have any way to really scale that, right? Take that and turn that into a scalable product. Wasn't talking about it in highlighting its core differentiation in the world. So building that new brand and new narrative. So Christine Evans, who's our president now, just literally top 3 in the healthcare space at this. Just incredibly talented. Done it at Castlight, she's done it at Fitbit. Incredibly talented, taking a brand and moving it to where it needs to be. And then we brought a guy named Peter Bridges in who grew our go-to-market team. Rock star in benefit sales, had been in the consultant world, really understood how to do that. Brought a CTO in and Alex Boisvert that had grown with me in the past and really understood. So built the team, right? Built the team that we knew would be successful. And then that team can do all kinds of stuff for you once you get them jamming together.
What were the several accomplishments you're most proud of prior to the merger? Like, what were things you were like really proud you accomplished before you became one with Headspace?
Rebuilding that team to be a world-class executive team was certainly part of it. We grew the company from, started was about 50 to about 500 at the merger, and incredible care team. When I joined, we were about 10 mental health coaches. I think we were around 200 at the time of the merger. Incredible team. Our clinical team grew dramatically. Our therapists and psychiatrists, again, just a world-class group of people. The brand we built, I think it was one of the best brands in the healthcare space.
That you guys had an amazing reputation.
In Ginger and
still do, but like when it was just Ginger by itself.
I think it's different now because of the power of the Headspace brand. But the Headspace brand was not a healthcare brand. Yeah. Headspace brand was truly a world-class digital consumer brand. Different level. But for a healthcare brand, I think Ginger was one of the best ever created. And
I agree.
Then to bring those two things together, there's a power to that we're still we're both still exploring and still growing. So when I think about what's next for this company, that's one of the most exciting areas, is that next level of healthcare brand, that now we have these two brands together in one. It's going to be a super exciting thing to watch.
I love it. Post-merger acquisition, what did that do for the member experience? What did that bring from two great things separately to now an end-to-end platform?
Yeah, well, this gets into some of the whys of the merger, because in the middle of COVID, we saw at Ginger that our platform was really helping a lot of people. Tens of thousands of people were getting care that wouldn't get care otherwise. Hundreds of thousands. But the world need was so massive, and there was never going to be a better time to take a really big swing and see if we can accelerate the number of people that could be supported by what we were doing. And that led to kind of a strategic review of the industry, and Headspace rose to the top. And there are a few reasons for that and for the merger. Firm belief that if you're going to build a successful digital health brand in mental health, and you're going to change the dynamics of how the mental health space works, you have to start with reducing stigma and prevention, increasing prevention. At the end of the day, you're just never going to get a handle on this unless people start taking care of themselves earlier. And we reduce the friction of people raising their hands and saying, I need support. Headspace has built this incredible, globally recognized brand that dramatically reduces stigma. Because it's not that hard to download Headspace and start a mindfulness practice or a meditation practice. It's enjoyable. That the amount of effort and time that team has spent building world-class experiences and curating a brand that doesn't have stigma, it's very difficult to replicate that. So that's part one. Now you have this ability to bring people in earlier. You have great content, 5,000 hours of mental health content. So part two is then, and this is where Headspace was looking for a partner, at the point of people's greatest need, when they're more acute and they need more support, Headspace wasn't able to help them. That's where Ginger comes in. And our abilities to take someone, so bring them in through Headspace, support them subclinically, assess what their needs are and step them up into other areas of support, whether it be mental health coaching, whether it be therapy, psychiatry, bringing all of that together now, you have this set of interventions that I believe not only can support the entire world, can scale to support the entire world, but starts to solve both the access and the cost problems also. Because we're not just blindly sending people with really bad for a system that doesn't have
enough therapists.
We are being smart about how we're supporting people based on their need. We're measuring, we're assessing, we're sending them to the right level. We'll scale up and scale down based on what their needs are and how well they're doing. And so that's where I think we have an opportunity here. When I say, get the brand to the next level, we have an opportunity to be the brand people think about when they think about mental health.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist today. And I think there is something that the world needs that we're building here.
I love that. It's like almost like mindfulness and meditation is the gateway drug to help someone eventually seek more intensive care if and when they need it, because it's just a lot more approachable.
That's right.
Yeah, that's great.
That's right. I don't know if our marketing team would call it a gateway drug.
Yeah, I wouldn't think they would, but
it's a reasonable metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. What's next for you and Headspace?
Yeah, well, so first of all, by the time this podcast gets published, we'll have launched our mental health coaching capability to our consumer space. So right now it's all software, it's all the content, but we're launching mental health coaching where anybody can upgrade to get one of our just amazing mental health coaches. We're super excited about that. From a mission standpoint, this notion of getting every person access to lifelong mental health support, this is a huge step forward to be able to get a Headspace mental health coach available to you for rates that are much more affordable than having to go to a therapist or some other, kind of licensed clinician, which is sort of the state of the system today. So that's super exciting. For me, I'm actually transitioning out. So I announced about a month ago that we're seeking a new CEO. And so I'm part of that search process. And I am preparing, once the transition is done, just take another year off. So do the same thing I did before.
You should. You worked a long time, and now you have earned the opportunity to catch your breath.
Be dad again. So I'm going to just focus on being dad for a year. And, my girls are now 15, 13, and 9. So it's a great opportunity before they start leaving the house to spend time with them.
Okay. Any plans for, several years down the line?
I firmly believe I'll stay in healthcare. I think at this point,
we'd miss you too much if you didn't. So
I appreciate
I'm glad to hear that.
I appreciate that. There's so much to get done here. I think I have an understanding of the space now that I'm excited about, having been in it now for 6 years. And at least at this point, I feel like I still have energy. So I'm in no rush, going to make sure I take the time off, but I'll probably stay in and around the space.
I'm sure you'd be a great advisor to a lot of companies. I'm sure you'd be great at, picking out winners and maybe getting into the investment side of the business. There's a lot of possibilities for us. So
a lot of possibilities.
What advice would you give to someone who's in tech that's thinking about dipping their toe in the water and, taking the plunge into, healthcare tech? What's great and what's, takes a little adjustment, and you'd say, hey, before you take the jump, here's some caution.
First of all, I don't have no caution. I would say absolutely do it. Waking up every morning, focusing on a mission as important as these healthcare companies are on. I mean, it's a totally different, mindset. When things are hard in, a software company that's, like my last one, making marketers slightly more successful. It's like, if we went away, would anybody even notice? Whereas waking up every morning, even when things are hard, and we're supporting literally hundreds of thousands of people, on a weekly basis, get mental health support, that is super meaningful. So I would say do it. And I would just say, be open to the learning curve. Be open to, you're not going to understand things right away. Learning is a lifelong pursuit. Be open to, modesty around what you know and don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And then my advice would be the same as any other company. Is the CEO someone that you feel like you can learn from and trust? Is the culture of the company one that you can bring your entire self to work every day?
Mm-hmm.
And then, finally, is the mission and product something that you're excited to work on? And if those three things are true, nothing else really matters. Like, yeah, you want the right title, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Yeah, obviously compensation is important and the upside is important. But if those three things are true, you're going to have a great experience no matter what else happens.
Yep. Well, I just pity the future bosses of your three daughters, because between having you and Robin in one household and like the bar being that high for like what a leader and what a boss should be, they're going to be on a short leash and put on notice, because if they're not doing those things, your
Norm,
daughters will be up and out and somewhere else.
Norm, those daughters are our bosses. We're the ones you have to worry about.
All right. Yeah. No, I'm just thinking like, they step into their first job and you and Robin are giving them advice and like, oh, like, what's your boss like? And what are they doing? And you're probably like nitpicking and you're like, oh, they're doing this wrong. They're doing that wrong. Just playing. But I do ask everyone who comes on the podcast, not only about your career in healthcare, but also how you personally participate in healthcare. And your wife walked us through some of the things she does, which, we really enjoyed. Personally, how do you participate in wellness? How do you reduce stress and practice mindfulness and meditation? You mentioned you were a user of Headspace well before the merger, but just walk us through other things you do.
I meditate almost every day, at least once a day, sometimes multiple times a day, even 60 seconds, of mindful breathing. I do a lot of one-on-one walking meetings. So I struggle with this all day long. And so whether I'm in person at the office, which I'm in the office a couple of days a week now, or I'm home, a lot of those are phone calls, and I'm either walking in the city with people or I'm on the phone and we're walking together. Because I'm pretty religious about the 10,000 steps. And so, make sure that I'm getting my steps every day. Getting sunshine every day is important to me. I struggle if I don't get enough fresh air and sunshine. I take mindful breaks throughout the week. So I have a calendar set up so that I have blocks between, at least an hour of blocks a day. And then I block my Friday afternoons. And I do that because during the week, if I'm feeling like I'm getting behind, that can get stressful. It can get anxiety provoking. But if I know I have that time blocked at the end of the week, I put it on the list, sort of Friday afternoon parking lot, and it reduces my stress level throughout the week. And then Friday afternoon, I have the time to catch up so that I can go into the weekend truly clear. And I can spend that with family. We had 7 sports events this weekend, so like I wouldn't have had time to work or go to the games also, but I was able to go to the vast majority of those. Whereas, if I hadn't cleared that, I wouldn't be able to. And then if I'm feeling good Friday afternoons and I'm caught up, I'll go play golf, or I'll go, do something for myself, right? Maybe I'll go on a longer walk. I'll go on a hike or something like that. So I'm very intentional about my use of time and keeping my kind of body battery, refreshed and up. I'm religious about sleep. I get at least 7 hours a night, and on the weekends more. I don't do what a lot of people say is same time every morning, because I love sleeping in more than anything in life.
So, you got to get the sleep when you can.
Yeah, so I'm a late sleeper on the weekends. I'm an intermittent faster. And interestingly, not because of anything I read, it's just I found that if I eat breakfast, I get hungry really early for lunch. And if I don't eat breakfast, I can eat lunch at a normal time without even thinking about it. And so it turns out to be pretty healthy for you to have those extended breaks of digestion and whatnot. But it was just natural for me. And then I run begrudgingly, but Robin loves to run. So I join her sometimes as like a company thing. I don't love running, but I do it because I know it's healthy for me. And and I row as well. I do some erg stuff.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, lessons in chemistry. They were doing that machine in the
Yeah.
show on Apple. Very, very good. Brie Larson. She was great. So highly recommend. And then just any healthy recipes you, Robin, and the kids make that you would highly suggest. I think, with cooking, sometimes it's hard to be creative. So when people hear, a recipe or an idea, they're like, oh, I could try that. And it hopefully will encourage people to eat healthier.
So I'm a dad of 3 girls, as we talked about. 2 of my girls are vegetarian.
Yep.
And so we always have to think about dishes that can go sort of both ways, right?
Yeah, you can add meat, but like the base is non.
That's right. So, taco night is very popular in our house.
Yeah.
Because people can make their own tacos and decide what they want in it. I make a Impossible Burger White Castle style. So
Ooh, okay.
that I highly recommend. So, I don't know, White Castle or Crystal, depending on what area of the country you're in, have these delicious,
Sliders. The original
slider.
slider.
They're delicious sliders, and they're basically steamed over a bed of onions. So I make that with Impossible meat, and then everybody loves it. So that might be one for people to try.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us on the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast. Very, very awesome to hear about your entire career journey. And, we'll have to have you back in a couple of years when you decide what's next.
Sounds good, Norm. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Russ. Appreciate it. Thank you for joining. Please like, comment, and subscribe below if you enjoyed it.